You would think that certain organizations that are trying to harvest public trust would stay away from politics. You don't want the police officer to go around and encourage people to vote for one candidate or another. You wouldn't want the military to start promoting one ideology or another. This is because you want every citizen, regardless of the way they vote and regardless of what politicians they support, to have trust in these institutions. And of course, these institutions are staffed by people with political leanings, but when they're coming out to the public, when they're making statements, they should stand away from politics. In fact, they should only do the job that they were assigned to do. And it's very interesting because the Center of Disease Control is recently becoming more and more political in a time of a pandemic, in a time where people should look up to this institution without wondering, did they make this decision in order to combat the illness? Or are they making this decision because of their political leanings? Like, for example, the CDC is a body which is being tasked with gathering information about illnesses and then compiling that data so that politicians who don't have medical experience can make decisions, political decisions, on how to move forward. So it's mostly advisory in nature. And if it's mostly advisory in nature, you need people to trust this institution in order to take those advices into consideration. And I think like the biggest thing that the CDC did in order to lose public trust was with the eviction moratorium. You see, the eviction moratorium was something that even the politicians couldn't pass. So what the US president did, as long as with other democratic politicians, exclusively democratic politicians, they asked the CDC in order to issue a decree that people shouldn't be kicked out of their homes that they're renting. So even if someone would refuse to pay rent, they wouldn't be able to be kicked out of their houses. And of course, like number one, this causes a huge political divide where a lot of people will point out, well, hold on a little bit. So you're saying that if I kick out a person from my own property that's not paying money, I'm endangering that person's life. But if the bank kicks me out for not paying my mortgage, isn't my life being endangered? Why are the banks being treated differently than people? Is like the virus not affecting the people that's kicked out by the banks? Is the virus and the banks working together? That's what a lot of people asked. But that's not the only problem, right? Because everyone knew that the CDC can't do this. And what ends up happening is that the Supreme Court overrules the CDC and says like, no, you can't do this. You can't say that people aren't allowed to be kicked out of their houses. Only the Congress can do that. So now the people who were going, oh, well, that's okay. Like the CDC has my back. They definitely can do this. They're worrying about my health and safety. Keeping my landlord away from my paycheck. That's great. Well, all those people had a rude awakening because maybe they made plans. Maybe they were like, you know what? I will have to pay my rent in this amount of time. So I'm good. I don't have to worry about it until then. So they managed to piss off literally everyone. Like right-wingers were pissed off. Left-wingers were pissed off. I guess the banks were happy. Like BlackRock was really happy. Because now a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm in a financial pickle. I guess I should sell my property rather than rent it myself. Because if you rent it yourself, you never know when the CDC may wake up. Yeah, you never know when another moratorium can kick in. And you can see this mistrust deepening when the CDC is releasing health equity principles for inclusive communication. Now, the idea of changing words in order to get things to be more quote-unquote inclusive is an inherently left-wing talking point. This is part of woke ideology. There is no other ideology on the face of the human earth that tries to change the meaning of words in order to be more quote-unquote inclusive. Never has been throughout the entire human history, and this is a partisan talking point. Now, it doesn't matter if you agree with this talking point or not. It should not be CDC's job in order to lecture people on language. Using language is not a mental illness. They're not trying to fight any illness. They're trying to achieve political change, which again erodes the trust in the CDC from the people who do not partake into the woke ideology. So let's see at some of the things that they want you to change. So first of all, you're not supposed to use words like inmate, prisoner, convict or ex-convict, offender, criminal, parolee, or detainee. So simple words, simple concepts that are very easy to transfer from one person to another, words that exist in all the languages of mankind. You're not supposed to use them. Instead, you're supposed to use walls of text in order to explain something that you explained previously. And these walls of text are trying to remove certain negative elements from inmates and prisoners. So now you're supposed to say, instead of inmate, you're supposed to say people who are incarcerated or detained, often used for shorter jail stay on youth in detention facility. I had successful masturbation sessions that lasted a lot shorter than this wall of text. By the time I finished conveying this information, I would probably be taxed extra by my phone company. Maybe this is what it's about. It's a conspiracy theory with the phone companies and the paper manufacturers, so that you spend a lot of ink writing your ideas down instead of being short, concise, and to the point. But what's also interesting is the way that changing the words removes the negative connotation from the mind of a person. Here's a perfect example on how this works. In World War I, you had the idea of shell shock. Shell shock described the harrowing experience that soldiers would face during the trenches. It was something that broke the human spirit. Just by looking at one of these victims to shell shock would show you the dread and the horror that people experienced in the trenches. Now, as time goes on, they try to make a new word, a new expression instead of shell shock. They now used battle fatigue. And as you can see, like, battle fatigue is not as impactful as the idea of shell shock, because it describes something normal. It's like, well, going into war is not that problematic according to the ideologues. Because, sure, I mean, the problem is if you go to war and you stay there too much, and then you get fatigued. And the solution is to just take the soldier out, help them relax a bit, and then they can go back into combat. Right? So now they changed the word into battle fatigue, making it so that it's not an illness, it can happen to everyone. You know, it's not a serious thing, you just need some rest and relaxation. And then they changed it even further. It's not battle fatigue, now it's post-traumatic stress disorder, which removes the idea of combat entirely. It waters down what it is. Like, you don't even think about shell shock anymore, which is where things went from. But not only that, now even people on Twitter apparently can get PTSD. There are people diagnosed with PTSD who have never been in combat, right? So the harrowing experience of a person in the trenches is now compared to the experience of a woman that spends time on Twitter, or a person that had some bad things happening in their life and now suffers from PTSD, which is comparable to what soldiers experienced in World War I under shell shock. So this is the power of language. This is the power of manipulating words, and this is why they are doing it, is to remove negative connotations from inmates, prisoners, convicts, or ex-convicts. And it's also bombarding you with ideological concepts that only exist in the West. You'll not find these ideological concepts in China. You're not going to find these ideological concepts in the Middle East. You're not going to find these ideological concepts in human history. But not only that, like, do you honestly think that during a pandemic, the CDC should try talking about pansexual, asexual people, two-spirit, non-binary people? You know, like, in the midst of an economic crisis, as well as the pandemic, when the CDC is very concerned about socializing your homes, taking away your private property, because even though it's yours, you can't do anything with it. You can't get the person who doesn't pay you rent, you can't kick them out. Meaning you can't sell your property either, unless maybe, well, you can sell it to BlackRock probably. They're getting very wealthy nowadays, I understand. The CDC is actually interested in sexual orientation, like people fucking. This is their primary goal. This is what they want to put out on their website. You know, let's see how people put their vagina into whatnot, and what you need to think about it is very important for the health of the population. Right now, in 2021, this is the primordial thing. It's like what hole goes into which peg and what. And again, like this erodes public trust because now every time the CDC is going to issue something, people will wonder, is this legitimately to do with the science? Or does it have to do with the scientist, which is a human being, corrupted by ideology, whether he believes it or not, or maybe he just says he believes it so he doesn't get fired, and the way the ideologue interprets the science? Because I guarantee to you, if you stack the CDC with hardcore Christians with Jesus tattooed on their penis, and they're going to be like the most radical Christianic people of all, the CDC would have very interesting and different takes regarding the science. Because here's the thing about the science. The science is the scientific method, which you do with hypothesis, experiment, and then conclusion. This is the science. But the science will tell you something like urine, human urine, is a very good electrical conductor. The science doesn't tell you whether or not you should take a piss on an electric fence. That is a matter of political opinion. That is politics. That is the conversation surrounding what we have observed. And while there might be people who say it's a good thing, or maybe people that think you should ban it, or people that think you should encourage it, that is a different conversation entirely, which has nothing to do with the science. But that conversation is also molded by the ideology that the person has. So a Christian person will have a different take on that conversation than a very progressive person. Progressive person might say, yeah, like all authority is bad. Telling people not to take a pee on an electric fence is oppression, and we don't want to live in a society of oppressors, so people should be encouraged and promoted, and everyone should accept others who pee on an electric fence. A Christian person might be, no, Jesus Christ came down from the heaven and said that people should be very careful about harming themselves and blah, blah, blah. So as you can see, this is why people do not trust institutions. Because now people, instead of like looking at an institution and thinking, okay, this institution deals with public health, everything they will say is only about public health, and they're going to try to keep their political opinions to themselves. You now have to wonder, well, is this institution actually about that, or is it about promoting ideology? And if you're still a leftist person and you don't believe what I've been saying up until now, question this. What if the CDC was stacked by racists? Like, what if you knew on Twitter that every person, or at least the higher-ups that work at the CDC, were racist individuals? They would have racist opinions. Would you still trust the CDC in that situation? And if the answer is no, maybe now you can understand why the other side is having difficulty in trusting more and more institutions when they put out shit like this. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the comment section. Take care.